I suppose it's not uncommon that there are divergences of learning demands between educators and learners. Sometimes learners have to take a dominant role in deciding the best fit solutions for learners, which may be overwhelming to some of them. In our next talk, Mr. Julian Ridden, Product Strategy Manager from Instructure Incorporated, the creator of Canvas, is going to share with us why it is a good idea to be student-centered. Please welcome Mr. Ridden for his talk on student-centered learning, why it's easier and more important than you think.
Okay, there we go. Good afternoon. Thank you for all coming back after the afternoon tea. The food was particularly good. Thank you again to Dr. Wong for inviting me to speak today. I want to take more of a pedagogy than a tool-focused talk this afternoon and talk around student-centered learning and the importance it is for us with working with our current educators. And to start with a little bit about myself, I worked in online education for the past decade, working mostly in instructional design, both with children and with university students around a variety of subjects. But at its heart, I'm a hopeless technologist. I love looking into the honeypot of technology. If it's new, if it's shiny, if it does something cool, then I want to look at it. In fact, with Professor Ip having started earlier, I actually really want to make sure I get good brownie points with him because my passion is in immersive technologies. So here we are, the various technologies, be it the Oculus Rift, the Google Glass, and of course seeing augmented reality. If there's something new and cool, I want to explore it. But the problem with that is often we get caught up in the technology, we forget about the problems that we're trying to solve. And so what I want to do, and especially in my role as a product manager, is I kind of have to step away from what are the cool things that technology can do and actually come back to what are the problems that we're currently facing and how can we solve them. And that's what I want to do today. And to start off with, I want to ask you a question. It's not one that I expect you to yell out an answer to, and it's actually quite what's the word I'm after? A rather divisive subject matter. Vast majority of students, I think, will go to higher education, will tell you the same thing. They want to do it to prepare them for their career. Whatever that career might be it medicine, be it economics, be it whatever field of study they've chosen to go to. And of course, we actually have a look. There are various studies that are looking at why the biggest reasons that students are going. We're seeing this as a continuous trend. But the problem with this, if we kind of have a look at this, if this is why we're going, if we want to focus on that for today, how successful are we as higher ed organisations in actually preparing them for those careers? What we did, we actually did a survey last year, going across 14 different countries, looking at how students, both current and past, thought that university prepared them for the career of choice. And what's interesting, if we have a look at both skills and experience, we found that if you combine both agree and strongly agree, skills-wise, current students think that university will give them about 80%. That's not too bad, actually. Experience-wise, yes, we know there's that gap between theoretical and experiential. But again, we've got a pretty good number of about 60, 70% on experience. But what's really interesting is while that's what the current student is thinking, we also want to find out what are students who have now left university thinking. And ouch, the drop is substantial. Okay, skills, we're about 50% now. Yes, university provided me with the skills that I needed, but experience, significantly lower. And we try and delve a bit deeper into that. Well, why is it so low? So we actually want to find out how many students ended up working in their chosen field of study. Less than 30%. Now, I'm not saying that's because, the courseware wasn't right. I'm not saying this is because of an academic failure. What we're often seeing, of course, is that students are actually in university to find jobs that didn't exist when they started, or new areas of passion, or often new things they discovered while at university itself. But if we have to recognise that, okay, universities, we're struggling necessarily to prepare them with skills and experience, there is something that I personally believe we do need to be focusing on preparing students for. That's uncertainty. That's the one thing that we can guarantee students are going out to the workforce with. If we have a look near the current students, I mentioned they may choose to change field because the work wasn't there that they thought was. They may change their field because of a growing passion for something else. There are many reasons that lead to it. And of course, the one that we always hear talked about is that wonderful statistic I use when talking with primary schools, that the jobs that we're training our children for now won't exist by the time they graduate university. In fact, by the time they graduate university, roles that we didn't even dream of now will exist, such as programming self-driving vehicles. I have a 7-year-old, and it horrifies me to think that by the time my child is old enough to have a driver's licence, she probably won't need one. You think about it, we've got Uber with their driverless cars. So how can we, as higher ed organisations, prepare our students for uncertainty? We can do that through focusing on creating lifelong learners. Now, I'm at a university. As lecturers, as professors, as doctors, we are all kind of lifelong learners by default. Education is our passion. This is what we are here for, and we are passing this knowledge on through research, through teaching, through training. But how can we build that ability into the students that we are teaching, be able to both give them knowledge and experience while also preparing them to become lifelong learners themselves? Because if we can do that, we're going to teach them the ability to adapt, not just to perform a certain skill set. In fact, one of the quotes I like bringing up is this one. They are lifelong learners who push themselves out of their comfort zone. Successful people remain students. And this is from Dan Schwabel. If we can do that, we allow them to better themselves both as students of ours now, as they become more self-directed, exploratory, doing their own qualitative evaluation and so forth, but yet preparing them for uncertainty. So I've just dropped this word a couple of times, student-centred learning. Those of you who are in academia will know, if you ask 3 different academics their definition of student-centred learning, you are guaranteed to get a minimum of 5 different responses. All right, some people classify student-centred learning as active learning. Some will specify student-centred learning as computer-based personalisation. It's very easy to kind of get caught up. For this talk today, I really want to talk about student-centred learning kind of like as an ecosystem of teaching practices, of environment, of student variables, a way that students can become responsible for their own learning practice. Now, computer-based personalisation, active learning, or authentic learning, these are all things that tie into giving students that ability. So I want to talk at a high level how we can do that as instructors, instructional designers and lecturers. And as I said, we want to understand the problem. If I have a look at a quick chart here, we talk at student-centred learning being the move from teacher-directed. Like we think about that traditional, I'm here as the owner of all knowledge, I'm here to dump that knowledge into you. We want to move that more towards learner-directed, where they will investigate, where they will research, where they will quantify and qualify. But it's more than just that. We also do that by moving from highly structured courseware, teacher-directed, where you might have a module. Each module has 200-odd resources and reference material and reading lists, to more of a low-structured course. And when we say structure, I'm not just talking about an amount of resources, but also A, then B, then C, then D, then E, to actually, here's a bunch of material that you can explore, that you can investigate at your own measure, at your own time. Student-centred learning is really about trying to move this shift, and to doing it in a way that still allows us to maintain the quality and control that we need as teachers, as assessors, but also delivering that ability for both self-reliance and even, I use the word self-redundancy, for them to be able to find problems, deal with problems, and find their own solutions and move forward as learners. And if we can do that, what we find ourselves doing is focusing more not just on the knowledge that we're imparting, but on the new skills that we're preparing our students with. And I could talk on this subject for a good 8 hours. We don't have time for that, and Dr. Wong will never get a chance to speak, and I'll never be invited back. So what I want to do is focus on 4 key areas. For student-centred learning, in my belief, to be effective, we want to make learning more active. We need to ensure it's authentic. I like Professor Wagner this morning opened up talking about, for him, the importance of all that authentic learning practice and what CityU was doing. We want to develop students' metacognitive ability and increase students' responsibility for their learning practice. And how can we do that? Well, the first step towards all this is active learning, right? Active learning acknowledges that the student needs to do more for themselves. And what I want to do is just kind of show some interviews from other people using Canvas. This is tool irrelevant, to be honest, but these are people who are using Canvas talking about how they're going through some of these processes. And hopefully the audio will work. Let's see what happens.
Of the philosophical view that teaching is an interactive and social element, and that's given me many options. I also believe in bringing the world inside to that learning management system, because if students are not active participants in their learning journey, then it's meaningless.
And I love that quote. If not active in their own learning process, it's meaningless. Now again, that's quite a large statement to make. But why does he say it's so important? And I apologise, I've shortened many of these videos just due to the time constraint. But the point he goes on to make is that need to engage in that learning process, to engage them in the content, makes them more involved, invested in it. And the more engaged they are, the deeper they find that material absorbs into their systems. And they can do that through an active learning process. So again, what do we mean by active learning? Hopefully we get to the next slide. There we go. There's an old metaphor I always like to use around the idea of, okay, I'm going for a bushwalk or walk through the forest. Now, yes, I may have my own maps, I may have my own guides, but what I'm actually doing is I go through and follow that the first time, I start to form a trail, and the more I go over this trail, the more it becomes embedded. It creates that rut. This is a very simple example of what I mean of active learning. The more you retread that path, the more permanent it becomes. The more you retread that learning material, the more permanent it becomes. And this translates into actively reviewing that knowledge. And again, as instructors, we often do that. I might have the same piece of knowledge put there in 4 different ways. Here is a document and a video. Here is a simulation. Here is a quiz, right? We've got different ways. And it doesn't need to be complicated to be active, right? Many people think about these processes, they get very caught up in the research and overcomplicate a pedagogical approach. It can actually be quite simple. And the first example I want to talk about is quizzes. Now, quizzes aren't sexy, right? They're certainly not my favourite example of active learning, but they can be effective because they're simple and they're tidy. If I have a look here, I might go through and create a practice quiz, or I put the content. And especially if I combine it with things such as, if I go to the next one here, unlimited attempts. It's going to randomly order the questions. The answers will show up in random order. Each time they do it, this is no longer about assessment. This is about retreading that path, revisiting that piece of knowledge and bringing it to the fore. It's a very basic, simple example of active learning. Especially if you go through a course, and here's one I put together where, I actually might have a self-check. No, but as we begin this module, here's a whole bunch of questions where you can check yourself on your knowledge. And as we go through it, at the end I'm going to repeat it so you can go through and double check. Again, we're kind of retreading that path. A very basic but simple example of active learning. And I finish up on this. Again, I'm keeping this short. I just want to plant seeds into your brain of ideas. But this idea again of quiz-based learning rather than quiz-based assessment. It's a change in focus of thinking of these not just as assessment tools, but of ways of engaging our students, cognitive practices. Now, I would not be giving a good talk on education if I didn't reference Bloom's at least once. I love the fact that most people here, I think, visually rolled their eyes at that. The reason I want to bring up this is actually not to talk about Bloom's. We all know it. I'm not here to lecture on it. What I want to do is actually talk about the definition of context before I move us forward to the next step. As we start thinking about the higher orders of thinking, moving towards creating, okay, there's so much research on that. But what I want to talk about, especially when we talk about student-centred learning, is the importance of context to a student. What I loved about your talk earlier was talking about how you've created this wonderful visual way to provide a different context to the student by visualising in a way that was not maybe visible to them beforehand. Context is that simple line between connecting with content and remembering it. As I talk about context moving forward, that's what I want you to picture where we are. Because, it might be great that I remember it, but if I've got no connection with it, there is no context of what that piece of content means. And it's very difficult to get to higher orders of thinking without understanding that first. And the best example I can ever give you of that is mathematics. It's very hard to move to calculus if I don't understand my basics of arithmetic. I can't do my basics of arithmetic unless I understand my basics of timetables, right? It's a simple example of context moving forward. So how can we create courseware that enables context? We can do that by making them authentic. And this brings me to my second point. Knowing is not enough. I can't be in Hong Kong without making some kind of reference to Bruce Lee, all right? Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Willing is not enough. We must do. This allows us to talk about authenticity. So how can we go through? Again, as I mentioned, Professor Wagner at the beginning, even from CityU's perspective, with many of the projects we're working on here, talked about that importance of authenticity. Authentic learning brings in content and context from the real world and makes the subject more concrete. And again, before I go on, I'll just show you a bit of an interview that'll help set the scene.
SLA is really unique in that it tries very hard to connect everything that we're doing to the world outside, because I think that's something that kids are frustrated with oftentimes in high school, where they are sitting in classroom all day and they don't feel like any of it matters.
So part of the 4-year program at Science Leadership Academy is the kids go out in what's called an independent learning program, where they're able to choose volunteer positions throughout the city or even make up their own. So they get release time on Wednesday afternoons that's usually used for that time. It doesn't happen a lot, but the nice thing about having an independent learning program, right, they get to choose how they're going to interact with the community at large in Philadelphia, and hopefully, find ways to make everything better. That's kind of the point.
So what you kind of heard there is people think of especially online learning as being 100% digital. By being 100% digital, everything must be brought into this digital space. That's not, I think, a correct statement. It might be digital delivery, but using practices we can bring in real-world activities, we can make, again, the information more contextual and more authentic to the user. And I'll try and use this, so a couple of examples to express this. Let me just move forward. Authentic experiences often take us outside the classroom. And we want to think about things like mobile technology as a way of enabling it. Again, I loved the talk that we started off with at the user group this afternoon, where Professor Ip was talking around the Hong Kong virtual project. Again, we're using virtual reality, using augmented reality to bring that real world in and to put the student virtually into that position, to visualise where they were and to make that connection between heaven, earth and mankind. I want to show a couple of examples how in Coursera that I've created we've done similar things, even without the advanced technology or advanced tools. Because what I find is, if we can find technology that allows our students to make this contextual and relevant to the real-world examples, that they get a better connection to it. So here's an example of what I used to do. One of my favourite tools, in fact, I was introduced to this by Jared Stein, who's our VP of Research, is a tool called the Wikipedia Education Program. If you're not familiar with it, it's an online program that actually helps classes, be it school age or university of students. They'll actually say, these are articles that need work. These are areas that we have gaps. We would really like your help to build content. And so it might be, the students creating an article to fill a gap or dramatically improving, referencing an existing article. And what we can do in Canvas, for instance, is create an assignment. And to bring in that real-world experience, again, I'm not talking about being real-world as in physical, but even in a digital world, they can do things such as submit a URL. For this example, the URL is actually, here's the link to the Wikipedia page where it's showing the edits that I made to this particular document. Or maybe it's to a blog I've created or to a YouTube video or something that I have created. And the great thing about these is because the student is still doing this external task, they actually are the author creating a piece of content. They are becoming the researcher. They are becoming the practitioner, even though it might be part of a task that I've created. And by inhabiting that role, they're connecting with that piece of material in a way that a lecture theatre never could. And that's what I mean by bringing real world in. It doesn't have to be physical for that to be the case. Let's move forward, there we go. And again, one of the great things about Canvas is that as an assessor, it will go through and bring that into the speed grader that we have inside of Canvas. So it takes a snapshot of that page so I can see what that student did. I can go through and then leave feedback, qualitative feedback. I can go through and map it against outcomes. I can go through and provide whatever the mechanism that I need. But the great thing about this, again, is that fear we have with technology. We get so much more relevance when it comes to technological use when we use the tools that the student wants to use. But the fear of that, of course, is that as the lecturer, I have to learn how to use that same tool. Actually, the great thing about things like this is I don't have to learn how to use Wikipedia to be able to assess this student's work. I've gone into the tool that I have learnt to use, being Canvas, to see the snapshot to provide the feedback, while the student may have chosen Wikipedia or Blogger or whatever tool it is that they've used to do this real-world task. And again, we talk more about real-world. Another simple example of this, of course, is the Canvas mobile app. Again, here's a simple example of a real-world environment where they can just hit record on a device without the complexity of hitting record, saving it, converting it, uploading it. The moment they hit stop, they go straight to their assessor. Each of these things allows the student, these authentic activities allow the student to change their identity, to become that role, to gain that contextualisation. So knowing I'm running out of time already, moving towards metacognition is also important. Metacognition is that ability to understand how you are learning, that reflective element of understanding what it means to me and the impact it has on me and my own gaps in knowledge. Because, especially with lifelong learning, the greater our level of metacognition, the greater our ability to self-direct, right?
In Canvas, when you get feedback, you get to look back at it and say, what did I do wrong? Can I make it better next time? And especially here at SLA, that we have 5 things that teachers look at: process, presentation, knowledge, application, and design. They give you feedback in those 5 specific categories and grade them all equally. And for example, if you get a 16 in process, but you get a 20 in knowledge, next time you'll say, I should be ahead of the deadline and I'll know what to do next time. And if you see that as a running theme in all of your projects, in all your classes, you know what to improve in.
So again, what I like about hearing the student talk about that, he was hearing that he was being given feedback from his, in this case, teacher, or in the case, in our form, it could be a lecturer, in the forms that he could understand, so he could then go through and better his work. And again, if you were interested, I've got much longer version of these videos that we have online. But, well, let's kind of go through a role play for a second. Imagine we've got a student who's preparing for an exam. Now, one reflects on her own knowledge and focuses on her gaps of understanding, right? The other just rereads the chapter and just goes through that typical revision, read, rewrite process. Which one learns more? At the heart of metacognition is that reflection on the work that you do and thinking about what works for you and how you are changing as a learner. And we're seeing a huge recognition of this in things like the medical education field, where we have a strong focus on that reflective practice, on how is what I'm learning impacting my ability as I'm demonstrating these skills in a real world. And if we can recognise the importance of metacognition, how can we develop that in students, and how can technology help us with that? In the video, the student, Nebel, was simply showing how that engaging process of the iterative process of writing and the iterative process of feedback from his instructor raised his own awareness of how he was learning and allowed him to better that approach. And we're seeing this as a recurring theme in research globally, in the US, UK, and coming out of Asia as well, that the more they become aware. In fact, to bring up a quote here, students in problem-based learning, which is a wonderful example of metacognition in practice, showed increased regulation of metacognitive skills despite a lack of explicit instruction. Well, wait a second. This is leading us again towards that student-centred practice. By becoming aware of their own knowledge and aware of how they are learning, they're able to better self-direct and take ownership without that need for explicit instruction. We're moving towards that less structured, lower structured courseware design. Canvas, how could I do that? Well, again, here's a simple example from other courses. What I've done here is actually create a discussion forum. That discussion forum, though, I've put a question up the top. And one of the features that we have is that they can't see any replies until they've made a post. In this particular case, I put a question. I put the first half of a YouTube video and I've asked them to predict what is the next step. Once they've made that prediction, my reply then shows up going, actually, this is what happened and this is why. Allowing the student, being a discussion forum, to not just by themselves but with their peers now go through and reflect on that. It's just a simple setting here. Users must post before seeing replies. Again, a simple use of technology to allow us to start engaging students in that reflective process. And of course, me giving it to them is part of it. But the great thing about things like discussion forums is that now by default becomes peer review. So we now have the peer review element stepping into the mix. We get huge success out of little steps like this so that students become more aware. Knowing we're running out of time, I'm going to skip a couple of things. The other thing is that something that we've done in Canvas by default is we've always made it that by default students can always resubmit a task to iterate their work, to iterate their ideas. And they can not just iterate the submission, but we give the students the same feedback tools that we have as assessors and lecturers so that they can record audio or speak to the screen or type in text explaining what they're doing to ask questions. This two-way kind of like 360 review process builds that metacognition in students in ways that are just unfathomable, but yet really simple to deliver, without losing control. And to extend on that again, this is why we also put things like learning mastery. Learning mastery is, each of the outcomes, each of the competencies that we're doing inside of Canvas, making that available to the students so they are aware, not just their performance from a grade level. Grade tells me if I'm passing or failing a course. Understanding how I'm performing against the outcomes, the competencies, actually allows me to understand how I'm perceiving this courseware, this material, and allow me to focus where I need to focus. And we extend that even further with our dashboards. Again, the idea of the dashboard is so that students can understand where they're fitting in. And it isn't just about competition as such, but I can actually see how I'm performing against my peers. I'm excelling, maybe I should help others. I'm in the middle, should I up myself? I'm actually near the lower bottom, maybe I should be seeking some help. Where in the past they always would have assumed everybody else doesn't get it either. These are all simple mechanisms that we're using to do that. And I finish up on this area with this quote: the capacity for self-monitoring has direct impact on the level and quality and therefore overall learning progression and academic achievement. This really sums up for me the importance of metacognition in this process. And of course, all of this then leads, so they're understanding their learning, they're doing more authentic experiences, we're going to a less structured environment. Well, for this to work, we also have to increase ownership, the responsibility of this to the learner.
Monopoly on learning for some thousands of years, and motivated, self-directed learners have been able to learn things outside of school forever. But for the most part, people are conditioned through the schooling process to think that to learn things, mostly you go to school. That, of course, has changed over the last 10, 15, 20 years. YouTube is 10 years old at this point. Wikipedia and the web itself are not that much older. I started out using online media to teach about online media, and the use of those media has a certain effect. One of the effects is that it kind of flattens the power hierarchy. But I discovered that the more I deliberately give some of my teacher power to the students and ask in return that they take more responsibility for their learning, the more interesting the learning becomes and the more interested they become. And after 10 years, I'd have to say that my main understanding at this point is very few of us, very few educators really have the trust to just cut their students loose to learn. Not that teachers are unnecessary, but students can find things which interest them, that awaken their passions, that fuel their self-learning, and share it with others, and can be assisted and guided and facilitated in that process by teachers. But the teacher needs to trust the student and scaffold it by telling them that they can find something interesting and we'll learn things that you need to learn.
And part of what makes people really nervous regarding student-centered learning is this idea of losing control. It's not about losing control at all. You're still scaffolding, you're still building, you're still providing. What we're doing is actually providing more control to them, more ownership, more advocacy of their own learning practice. And what I love about that, I'm being given the 1 minute sign, I'll try and keep this short, is it's critical for SCL, for students learning to work, for them to have that ownership and responsibility. So let me very quickly try and give some examples of how we can do that. Howard in that video talked about the power of collaborative learning for increasing student responsibility. And it's like we all nod our head, increasing responsibility is a good thing, but we reported on a white paper last year focusing on how technology can help with this. And I wish I had more time. But what we actually saw is looking at how students had increased connectedness and responsibility. Reciprocal teaching methods, 80%. Peer tutoring, 66%. I say I don't have the time to talk through these stats, but if you want to grab me afterwards, I'm kind of happy to go into the detail of the data on this. But really what we're starting to see is that these things had a really positive effect on motivation, attitude, and the learning of the students. All without necessarily losing control of our teaching or control of our material, but just by giving more ownership of self-direction to them. And examples inside of Canvas are things such as student groups. Student groups allow students to go through and have spaces that they own. They can create pages, create their own discussion forums, create their own collaborations inside a structured place, a space that we still can view, mentor, provide feedback on. If you work in medical, this is a fantastic tool for that kind of iterative reviewing process. And again, we kind of see the focus from students. And again, this is the data we have from inside of Canvas. In courses, discussion's got a 45% use, but you move those to student-centred environments and that goes up to 90% because they made material that resonated with them, that was important to them, yet still covered the outcomes that I was directing them towards. Everybody won. And again, another example is assignments. Let students edit or delete their own discussion posts here. Who can edit a page? Inside Canvas, we can create pages, as you do in Blackboard and Moodle, but one of the features we have here is who can edit it. The power we have when I actually say, you know what, the students can edit it too. This isn't loss of control because it's all still audited. I know who made what change. But when all of a sudden I get to empower my student body to all work on the material and better it, by the end of this course, the material not only had doubled in size, but it was all cross-referenced and qualified. All I was doing was just double-checking it. It was incredible. So again, we're seeing a lot of this coming through with just basic use of technological tools. And so I come back to this. You're making the learning active, authentic, focusing on metacognition and responsibility significantly improves it. And we come back to employers. I know I'm just about out of time, so I have to kind of finish up here. But again, I kind of start off, what do the students see as important to them, why they went to university, to prepare themselves for their career? Let's look at the flip. What did employers expect? Employers were expecting students to be able to work in team, to apply to the real world. To 70% said they expected their students to be able to solve complex problems. Was university preparing them for these skills? No. Were they satisfied? 24%, less than a quarter of employers were satisfied that students could do this. This is why we need to start investing in this kind of practice. So, knowing that we are out of time, I finish up with this wonderful quote. This actually came from the video from Chris Lehman earlier on. It's easier than you think. I showed some very basic tools. Hopefully I explained the theory, and this is intentionally quite high level. I could speak on this subject for 4 hours. We don't have that time. Please do your own research, your own evaluation. But this idea that doing this loses control and is highly complex and involves fancy tools is not the case. It's much easier than you think. And on that note, thank you very much for your time.